Hello and welcome to Guild Wars 2 Daily. Today we are talking about lore. Once again, I've got two questions today, mostly because it's coming up to 9 o'clock at night and I still haven't had a chance to actually film this episode, so we might not have so much time. But really, once again, we'll find ourselves talking about expansions again, but some more lore-focused stuff and some more interesting stuff down there. But yeah, the footage in the background, before we start off with all that, and I jump ahead of myself, which I've already really done, the footage comes from the KOC Guild, so thank you very much to them for the footage there, and you can find a link down in the description if you want to check out their other stuff. So before the questions, two things I really wanted to say about the Tengu thing. Glad you guys liked the Tengu thing, by the way. I watched it back and I don't know, I felt like a lot of the lore for the Tengu doesn't really explain why I like them so much, but a lot of you kind of seem to get the enthusiasm across anyway. They are my favourite lesser race, they really, really are, and I can't wait to play as them, and I'm sure we will be able to. But I actually learned some interesting stuff. Funnily enough, the Tengu are actually a real-life mythological being, like a Japanese mythological being, which I never knew about. So when they designed Guild Wars 1 in Prophecies, they actually created this race after that mythological being from the real world, the Tengu, and that must have been why, or at least one of the reasons why, when they were developing this Asian continent, this Asian expansion, factions in Kantha, they decided to develop the Tengu as a race more rather than the other ones, which was really, really interesting. One thing I said in that video, I've taught you everything about the Tengu. One tiny thing I realised after editing that I didn't tell you about was their names. They have very specific naming conventions. They'll have like one first name that is typically a single syllable or two syllables, and then beyond that they'll have a second name that is a combination of a verb and then like a part of their body. So for example, Talon Swiftwing was a character we knew before, and a lot of them had names like that, like Quick Claw and Swift Feather and stuff like that. So that's kind of their naming convention. Never mentioned that in the episode. I mentioned it now. Now we're 100%. There you go. And yeah, let's get on to today's questions. The first one was asked by JimJam0511, who said, "So I've been wondering, what storylines do you think the expansions will follow? Do you think they will all focus on defeating the Awakening Dragons, or do you think the game has the potential to go in other directions? I'm interested to hear your opinions." I know in these videos we keep talking about the expansions. I know that we do, and I am trying to curve that, but I think this is a very interesting question, and a lot of people tend to just default to, oh, they'll just do more dragons. We've got 5 dragons, we're only going to be killing one of them, or at least fighting one of them in the game at launch. That means we'll probably have one for each expansion. For a start, I don't believe that for a second. I think one for each expansion could get boring for people. I definitely think there'll be an expansion where we probably fight 2 at once, and owing to the fact we have lore that suggests the Elder Dragons aren't necessarily always in allegiance with one another, we might even have one where we're like fighting 3 or something and they're also fighting each other at the same time, or we're pitting them against one another. I really wouldn't be that surprised about that. The only mystery I think when it comes to that is the Deep Sea Dragon. I'm not sure quite how that fits into everything, whether that dragon's going to be allied to us in the end. Nothing suggests that, by the way. It's just this is such a mysterious card right now. I'm wondering what ArenaNet are going to do with it when they finally reveal it. But I do think that each expansion will deal with killing an Elder Dragon, but I've said that that's not the only thing that these expansions are going to focus on. Just like the game at launch isn't only going to focus on Zhaitan. Sure, if you play as a Sylvari, they do focus more on the Elder Dragon straight out of the gate, but the Sylvari have also got a lot of other stuff going on with them to do with the Nightmare Court and all kinds of things. You know, the cycles and them finding their place in the world. And every other race has got far more stuff as well going on. Just look at the amount of lore there is still for the humans and all their inner conflicts and all the things that they care about, all the different places and directions that the story can go. And that's how the game's going to be at launch, where we're dealing with a lot more than just fighting Zhaitan. And that's how it's going to be in the expansions too. The expansions will be about fighting the other Elder Dragons, I don't have a doubt about that, but we can't forget that there is other stuff in the world that might be happening. And I had a very quick think, very quick, before I started filming this. I just hashed out a couple of things that I thought, yeah, there's something else going on in the world that we know is something, but hasn't really flourished into anything in the game at launch. And I just wrote such a long list immediately. Starting off, I may as well start with what my favourite perspective thing that we will be focusing on in a future expansion is going to be, and that's Alona, a character named Palawa Joko, who was a lich that is very, very mysterious. We don't know how old he is, we don't know where he came from or anything like that. We just know he's this old lich that basically can't die, and once tried to take over all of Alona and came very, very close to it. I told this story, or a part of this story, in Guild Wars 2 Daily quite recently, where I was talking about Shirai High Ossa and the founding of the Order of Whispers. This was the evil guy that was in charge of all of those undead that was trying to take over that whole continent, and then Churai stood up to and managed to defeat. Now this guy Palawa Joko couldn't be killed, so he was just sealed away in a tomb. In Guild Wars 1, while you're playing through Nightfall, just essentially by proxy of having to fight Abaddon, who was trying to destroy the world himself, you actually had to kind of free Palawa Joko. You actually free this terrible, terrible criminal from all these years before that tried to take over the entire continent. You free him and essentially strike a deal with him. He helps you get to Abaddon, essentially, or Varesh at the time, and you essentially give him his freedom, which was a terrible, terrible move. But that happened in Nightfall, and really we just know that Palawa from that point on starts rebuilding his strength. He's an evil guy. He's a fantastic character, really, really likable, funny character, but an evil one and a villain without a doubt. And he just goes off and starts building up his armies. It gets to the point where in Guild Wars 2, he has a huge army of undead again. He has dammed the river that flows through that entire continent, the River Elon, and essentially provides life to that whole continent. He specifically dammed that at its source, basically, to starve and gain control over everyone in Alona, and that's how he took over Alona in these 250 years. And because he's dammed that river, that's now flown north in a completely different direction, and what was known as the Crystal Desert in Guild Wars 1 is now actually a lush and beautiful place. And you look on the map, you can see there's this huge river flowing through the Crystal Desert. That's the River Elon, and that's because of Palawa Joko. So you see the effects that he's had on the world, this huge, huge effect on the Crystal Desert, and he's changed a lot of things. Now he's in control of Elona, essentially. We know that much. There will be resistance there, definitely. A lot of the stuff that was going on in Nightfall will still be there. I mean, there'll probably still be the provinces, there'll be Vabi, there'll be Corner, there'll be Istan, there'll be lots of humans there still trying to fight, though we don't know the extent of that because that's very hazy lore at this point. But, well, the reason why this is my most interesting thing that I'm looking forward to it with an expansion is because Palawa Joko doesn't like the Elder Dragons either. He seriously does not like them. And the closest one to him, essentially, really, he's got two on his doorstep, vaguely. He's got one in the very north of the Crystal Desert, Kralkatorek, who's pretty close. And he's also got Zhaitan himself. Zhaitan is very close there. And we've heard that Zhaitan is fighting Palawa. Zhaitan's armies of undead, because Zhaitan is an undead Elder Dragon, is fighting Palawa Joko's armies of undead. It's a very, very cool idea that these guys aren't actually in allegiance and they're fighting one another over there. Very cool. This is all stuff that we won't have access to at the launch of the game. There are a lot of questions. For example, Palawa Joko is a lich, and we know for a fact that a lich was created by messing around with magic energies near where Zhaitan was asleep in the case of Vizier Kilbron. So there are a lot of questions as to, hey, was Palawa Joko made a lich because of Zhaitan? Is Palawa Joko then, therefore, perhaps Zhaitan's old champion? Has he defected from Zhaitan, like we saw Glint defect from Kralkatorek? Is that what's going on? And now they're waging war against one another? Very, very cool idea. And consider this, at the end of Guild Wars 2 at its launch, we're going to defeat Zhaitan in some way. That removes Zhaitan from the picture and gives us a straight shot at Palawa Joko. So that's a pretty strong reason why I think perhaps the first expansion might actually take us immediately into Alona, and seeing that stuff with Palawa Joko is very, very exciting to me. That's really cool. But obviously, there's more stuff going on as well. You've got loads of stuff in the other continent, the Canthans. I mean, we've heard very little about these as well, but how xenophobic they've become. We've been hearing so much about how humanity is on its last legs, and yet they seem to be going very, very strong in Cantha. Cantha, the land itself, will have changed very significantly from what we knew it as in Guild Wars 1. In Guild Wars 1, there was a huge forest and there was a huge sea, and they'd both been petrified, turned to amber and turned to jade, and now that's all gone away. All that magic powers left those areas, so now there's just a completely changed landscape down there, and the way that the Canthans work as well has completely changed now that they're so xenophobic. The Kurziks and the Luxons no longer really exist as vassal states. They've been integrated into the Empire. Loads of story available there as well in that place. Then you've got to consider places in Guild Wars 1 that we didn't actually go to in Guild Wars 1, but we know that they're in lore. Just talking about Cantha, we know that there's a place further south than Cantha where humans came from. They were brought to Tyria by the gods, and then they moved north from wherever they originally were brought to, north up to Cantha, then even further north up to Alona, and then even further north up to Tyria, the continent Tyria. So we know there's a place down there as well. Well, what about all those kinds of areas? And when we're talking about the origin of the humans, you've got to look at all that human lore as well to do with the gods and how the gods have left. What are the gods doing now? Are the gods going to come back at at some point? Where did humanity initially come from? Where's this human homeworld that they were from? There's all these other stories. That's very human-centric, and I would caution that ArenaNet probably wouldn't do a whole expansion based on just that. But that's the point that I'm trying to get across here, that there's so many different bits of story going on, and we know for a fact that the expansions are going to take place going against these Elder Dragons, that we can expect this stuff to happen. We can expect more human-centric storylines to perhaps come along, because it's going to be bundled with lots of other storylines centric to other characters. If theories that suggest that the Pale Tree that the Sylvari are born from, that there's another one in camp that are true, then that means straight away that we've got reason to go back there as humans and as Sylvari. That's a very Sylvari-centric storyline, but it's not going to stop them from putting it in the game. So there are a lot of different things that could be coming through. You've then really, a nice thing that I've been looking at is if you look at the world map of Guild Wars 2, you can see all of the regions you can go to, and then the names of the regions that you can't go to. I've talked before about the Isles of Janthir, the potential homeland of the Massart, one of these other races we knew about in Guild Wars 1. Well, what about there? It's there on the map. Eventually we'll be able to go there, so that's going to bring along with it a whole load of new story about the Massart. Guild Wars 1 at launch, Prophecies, that was the storyline. They were the big bad guys. That was everything. It was all about the Massart. That is a big thing that they could eventually go back into, and it doesn't necessarily have to be human-centric either. We know that the White Mantle still exists in Guild Wars 2, and they do have some role to play, at least in the beta as far as we've seen so far. They'll probably have more, especially when we get into these other areas, and there's loads of them on the map, absolutely loads. I mean, the Maguma Waste, they've become a wasteland. Some people say it's something to do with Primordus. What if it's something even more interesting than that? We can't actually go to that whole region in the launch of the game, so ArenaNet are going to have a big compelling story for us to go there eventually. So what about all the story that's going on there? Then, even moving off the map again, don't forget about the other Char homelands. Those are lots of things that could be going on there. You've got the homelands of the Ash and the Blood Legion that we can't actually go to. We're only in the Iron Legion's homelands at the moment. I talked recently about the Blaze Ridge Mountains and how we've been getting a bit more lore there, and we know what's past those mountains now. Well, now it's there in the lore. It's only a smaller step now for us to actually be able to go to these places that aren't even on the map at the moment. There is a lot of storyline that they can go with, and I mean, just to round it off really, I suppose the Norn as well. There are stories that could go on with the Norn. I think when we're talking about them, for me, the main one would be if the Kodan ended up showing their true colours and decided that they didn't like the Norn or something, and some kind of war happened there, or some kind of fighting happened there. I mean, there are just vast possibilities. It's just set up and sprinkled all the way through the lore. Going back to the humans, you've got all this stuff in Ascalon about how all the ghosts are there, and yet we also have all this lore about how these two swords coming together could cure Ascalon of this, and the ghost would finally be laid to rest. Well, maybe that story will eventually come in. It would be very interesting to see the landscape of Ascalon be completely revamped like that, but that story that they've set up and stuff that can change. And the Char as well, another big thing, cool thing with the Char is the idea that the Iron Legion Imperator is a very unconventional guy, and he has in his possession now the claw of the Kan-Er, and this thing could potentially reunite all of the Char, but he's very unconventional, and there's a chance that this guy's going to break the claw so that the Char will never fall into the traps of infighting that they once did. So what do we say about that? If he does destroy the claw, what does that mean for the other Char legions? That could throw the Char into civil war, potentially, which I think actually would be a good reason for us to then be able to go to the homelands of those other areas. There's a lot. You can look at every single main race and you will find a lot of stuff there, not even mentioning the lesser races, which they're going to do information on. The lesser races, as expansions come out, if we're going to get more races to play as, those lesser races are going to come forward too. I've just said all of this stuff. The last lore episode was a Tengu spotlight, and you all know how much lore's there as well, which I haven't even got into, and that's going to be the same in every single situation. So really my answer to this question is that yes, I think it will be to do with the Elder Dragons. I really do, for the first few expansions. We might even have one expansion that's to do with an Elder Dragon, then the next one isn't, and then the next one is, and then the next one isn't, just to drag things out. But even on those ones that are to do with Elder Dragons, that's not going to be the be-all and end-all of the plot. There is going to be a lot more going on, and ArenaNet have set up a lot more. This is just a handful of my favourite stuff, the stuff that came straight to my head, and there's just, you can theorise about so much in the world that they could expand on, because the writers have mentioned many times that they have an open door policy when it comes to writing lore. They don't really like to write out chances to just allow them to have a lot of creative freedom. Whether you agree with that or not is kind of beside the point, because it does mean that at this moment the world is very open and they can do a lot with it, and they've sprinkled little clues and hints as to what they might end up doing all over the place. So yeah, those are my general thoughts on what could be coming in expansions. Lots of stuff, very exciting. I think that's why I come back to expansions all the time, because it just excites me so much. But yeah, I did have another question about how humans will fare in the future of Tyria. Maybe we'll go into that next episode. I want to do another Spotlight Next Lore one, though. I think I might do it on the Celestials. If you'd rather see a Spotlight on something better, let me know. And if you see someone's already typed it, thumb it up, because the thumbs ups really, really do actually help quite a lot. So, yeah, I'm thinking of the Celestials at the moment, because I mentioned them before. If you've got an idea for a better topic, please feel free to let me know. Anyway, there you go, guys. That's Guild Wars 2 Daily for today complete. And I guess I will see you tomorrow.